you don't know me, my name is Kelly. I work with hospice patients a lot, preparing them as they help to transition over. I also work in private practice, spiritual counseling and coaching. I'm a trance channel, and we really try to call in guides and spirit and connect with everybody to sort of remember who we are and the journey we're on. I love that song we just sang. Heaven knows. We might forget, but heaven knows. And that's what really this whole journey we call life, this incarnation that we're here now for, is. It's about remembering. And in that remembering, we really start learning. As I've shared before, life is a school. Either we just came here to suffer, or the challenges that we face are here to help us grow and to teach us. Now, I really hope this morning to be one of the first people to say to you, Happy New Year. Now, I see a few looks of confusion because you're thinking you might be the first, but you're like 4.5 months late. Well, that's by the Gregorian calendar. By the ancient Persian calendar, it was at the spring equinox. By the Hebrew calendar, it's today, is the new year. Now we've got two ancient civilizations, philosophies, and religions celebrating the new year now. We start in the middle of the winter. Now it makes more sense to me. So, why do these long-standing, well-known, ancient religions, these cultures, why do they start the new year now? New seasons, new time, new growth, things are changing. See, today is not only the new year in Judaism, today is also Passover. Now, if you don't know what Passover is, later today you can go home and watch Charleston Heston and the Ten Commandments. But if you're under 50, you probably don't know what that is. You're like, who's Charleston Heston's? What are the Ten Commandments? They really don't sound too good. I don't like that. So, here's a quick story. The Canaanite people, they had moved from the land of Canaan, which is now Israel, down into Egypt. This guy named Joseph, he was the youngest of a lot of brothers. He was a bit arrogant and a butt, and so they got really ticked off at him. They threw him in a well, and then later they sold him into slavery. You think your family's bad? It might be just as bad. I'm not trying to diminish anyone's journey. I'm just saying. So they sell him into slavery because he's really arrogant. He gets taken down to Egypt. Find out his arrogance comes from his spiritual gifts and his psychic abilities. He can predict the future a little bit. He can interpret dreams. And he has these dreams. And I don't know about you guys, but last night, we've had a full moon the past couple of nights. Man, I had the craziest dreams last night. And I hope none of them come true. Joseph is down there, and he's in Egypt, and he tells the Pharaoh, which is another word for king, like, hey, this famine's coming. You guys need to store up some grain, because in 7 years it's going to be here. There'll be 7 years of famine. So Joseph, he stores up grain, or the king, they store up all this grain. Joseph's family ends up coming to him asking for grain because they're starving. He eventually reveals who he is. They end up moving down there, making a long story short. They get down there. Then other people of the Hebrews, Canaanites, they come down. They get down in there into Egypt, and at some point, Egypt gets kind of like, ooh, we've got a lot of these Hebrews around. They kind of scare us because they outnumber us. Maybe we should round them up and put them in something like refugee camps and make them slaves. No, that's a movie. And so they're in this period of slavery, we read in the text. And the Pharaoh/king's grandson, who his daughter found in a basket in the river, finds out that he is of Hebrew descent. His parents are Hebrews. They put him in a basket to hide him, to save his life, because at some point they were being killed because these people were numbering them, and the government, the king, felt a threat by these people. So Moses gets adopted by the king's daughter. The king's daughter raises him in their castle, palace, whatever. Moses learns that he is actually Hebrew, not Egyptian. Then he has this very significant moral dilemma, like, what do I do with this now? So then ends up, God calls him to set his people free, to lead them out of captivity. So Moses, after some arguing with God, goes and is like, okay, you need to let our people go. King's like, yeah, right. And so then God's like, okay, go tell them that we're going to start sending these plagues. And plagues are a biblical word for really bad things like curses. And something happens with frogs and grasshoppers and the rivers turn to blood and all sorts of stuff happens. And then the Pharaoh's like, no, you guys aren't going. No, you aren't leaving. No, you're staying here. You're working for us for free. There's great economic advantage to that. And at some point, God, in this narrative, tells Moses, you go tell him, if he doesn't let the people go, I'm going to kill all the firstborns in the house. He said, except for you guys, if you take and kill a lamb, take its blood, paint it over your door. In Hebrew, it's called daleth. Paint it over the daleth. And then when the angel of death comes, if the blood is on your door frame, the angel will pass over. Passover today is a remembering of that event, the liberation of those people, their journey and wandering in the desert for 40 years, and then finally getting into crossing the Jordan River into the land of Canaan. Today is also Palm Sunday. And if you come from a Christian background, you might know that this is a day where Jesus was thought, we read in the text, to have rode into Jerusalem for this legally mandated event he had to attend. He comes in and people are throwing down palm fronds because they believe he's the Messiah. Christ is a Hebrew word that means anointed. Later in the week, things change and the perception of Jesus changes. He finds himself falsely arrested and then later killed. But we find ourselves in this time right now, this new year, this new beginnings, celebrating and remembering tragedies. We find ourselves remembering times of struggle, times of hardship, and even times of death. And really what symbolically is, it's like re-entering the womb or a cocoon. And it's a time of change, of rebirth and growth. And next week, Reverend Ruth, our transitional minister, she'll be talking about resurrection and revitalization. But this is a week to remember struggle. It's to remember growth. And see, I think what happens as humans, we are so easily, so ready and so quick to gloss over any hardship we have in our lives that we fail to recognize the periods of growth and reconciliation that they are. And it's often it's reconciling with ourselves. we read in the text that Jesus, basically from age 12 to age 30, this 18-year gap, we know nothing about. In the Bible, it says something like, he grew strong in the nature and stature and wisdom of the Father, or something like that. Now, if you've raised or had a teenager in your house, you know that sentence isn't accurate. Nor is one sentence long enough to cover. Look at you. Some of you guys are still making faces. Nor is it one sentence long enough to cover an 18-year period and be accurately descriptive of any of us. And what some people are believe and what's starting to sort of eke out is that there are these sacred texts from the East, from India and Tibet, that in that 18-year period, people say that Jesus was there studying Eastern mysticism and spirituality. They've been hidden, they say, they've been protected, but now they're safe to starting to let them out. Whatever happens during that 18-year period, Jesus suddenly shows up, and he has this theology that's very different from the Hebrew theology of the time, which was an external deity that had continually be sacrificed to. And Jesus shows up and says something like, well, the kingdom of God is within you. The kingdom of God is at hand. And it becomes such a threat with this teaching that's so counter to the theology and the economic system of the day that he gets killed. And it's presented to us as like the last sacrifice. Now, I get it. If I was the disciples and this guy that I thought was God suddenly gets killed, I would see how it would be easy to revert back to the theology of the day and think, well, this is just a sacrifice. But what if it's actually more? Did we just lose my mic? Okay. But what if it's actually more? What if Jesus' death and his resurrection, he was in a different body. People didn't recognize him. Mary Magdalene, who had been with him, comes and runs up to the gardener and says, like, gardener, what have you done with my Jesus? He's like, Mary, it's me. We read about this journey down south, and people are walking with him, and they walk for a long ways, and they don't know it's him until they finally sit down to have dinner. And he reveals. So something happened. Something in that death, in that time in the tomb, happened. Regardless whether that was historically accurate or not. And it's so symbolic of what you and I go through. Because when we go through the cocoon, the womb, and go and prepare for rebirth, it's transformative. But we find ourselves in it, and it's usually like so darn hard, and it's so not what we want in the moment. We fight it, we resist it, we ignore it, we do everything we can, except for really realizing this is probably something that we and God have co-created together. Us being fractals of the divine, and the divinity with us, creating this for this learning experience that we have. If it's not that, as I said earlier, we've only come here to suffer. So if we start to reframe and revision these periods of distress, not to diminish what you're going through. I'm not saying it's not hard. I'm not saying it's not painful. A few weeks ago, I was down in Southern California for some shamanic training, and part of the training was doing this very deep journey. And any fear, any wound, any hurt that I had, because of the training, was brought up. And that was part one. I'm like, okay, he said, when are you going to do part two? I'm like, let's wait a little bit. see, whatever's happening to you now, whatever's happened to you in the past, and whatever you might encounter that you consider adversarial, it's an opportunity for growth. One of the most impactful books I've ever read is a book by this guy named Richard Rohr. He's a Franciscan priest. And it's called Falling Upward. And it's like through these times of challenge is when we grow. I realized after I spoke last time that a lot of you guys are new here since I told part of my story, which is like 2.5 years ago or so, and my deconstruction. And to make it just really quick, 2007, I took a year off from ministry. I was a United Methodist minister in rural North Carolina. I was Southern, and I was evangelical. And I go to this place called Bethlehem to work with Bethlehem Bible College and their humanitarian aid organization. I thought Bethlehem was in Israel. I quickly found out you have one more border you cross. We had to stop the car. I had to get out and go dig through all the luggage and pull my passport back out again because I did not realize there was another border to go through. And you go into the Palestinian territories. My first day at the Bible college there, I walk out on the street, and across the street there's like these really gray, discombobulated concrete block buildings that really don't fit in with the Mideastern architecture. And I asked the gentleman with me, I said, what are those? They looked so out of place I had to ask. And he said, well, that's a UN refugee camp. I was like, refugees from where? And he said, well, you know, Jerusalem. I was like, well, Jerusalem's only 6 miles away. Why are there refugees from Jerusalem here in Bethlehem? And he said, well, you know, in the 1947, 1948, pre-Israeli paramilitary forces came and drove people out of their homes with military power. And he kept saying, you know. And I didn't know. It's 2007. When Facebook just had started. I'd go up to the top of, and there was another refugee camp behind us. Now I'm not making this political. This is just my experience. And every night I'd go up to the top of the Bible college and I'd pray. And I'd see this refugee camp and I'd see that refugee camp. And the first thing I thought of, you know, as a conservative, really evangelical Christian, I went with this vision that, well, Israel's God's chosen people and Palestinians are terrorists. And I'm sitting on top of the Bible college, flat Middle Eastern architecture. I go up there to pray. And the first thing I think of is like, well, God, what have I done to contribute to this narrative? Because what I quickly found out was like it's Palestinian Christians who's been guarding all the holy places. Well, I didn't know that. And then about a week later, I collapsed in a puddle of tears when I was up on that roof. And I said, God, the same people that told me about this, they also told me about you. They're wrong about this, or they're wrong about you too. Do you even exist? You know, I had professionally put all my eggs in one basket, spiritually put my eggs in one basket, and found out that my basket had holes in them. What I had been told was not accurate based upon my own eyes and what I was seeing and experiencing. Thankfully, I was there for 7 months. Because had I only been there for a week or two visiting, I could have come back and forgotten it. But as you sit and talk with people, and really the politics of it really isn't the main issue. The politics of it was that what I had thought I've discovered was no longer true. My worldview was no longer accurate. What I had as my foundation was broken. And here's the point. What do you do when that occurs? And for a lot of us, our Bethlehem's right here. It might even be in your own home with something going on. It might be in your workplace. It might be with your family. It might be on the other side of the country, and you came all the way over here to get past it and away from it. What I will say is just like Bethlehem might have given birth to Jesus, it gave birth to me and gave birth to who you see now, which is very different than who I was pre-Bethlehem. Life is defined by that moment. At first, I was really angry because I felt like I had been lied to and I'd been told this, and this, and I got there and this, and this wasn't accurate. When I got back to the States, I was like, hey, this is what's going on. And I really started throwing out the baby with the bathwater. And we talked about that a little bit last time, about how when we evolve in our spirituality, we might grieve and miss that relationship with the divine once we realize that we are divine. We're no longer in that communal state. And it was through years of work and of anger and processing and all the stuff, y'all know what I'm talking about, that I finally came through with a healthier spirituality that no longer just threw away everything, but one where I could look back and like, I can read those words of Jesus now in a very metaphysical and different light. And the really funny thing is, those early desert mother and fathers, they took Jesus' words in that very metaphysical way. And what we often call new thought or new age is really old. Just like everything, it comes back around. And it's now around in this Piscean age of growth and of rebirth. And I really come today just to encourage you. If you find yourself in there, don't resist it. Because the more you resist, the longer it takes. 160 years ago, 160 years and 3 days ago, there was in the town of Salem, North Carolina. Salem was settled by Moravians. Moravians came from what's now the Czech Republic. It was the Bohemia, Moravia area of that region. They came and settled in Pennsylvania, Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. Then they migrated to North Carolina, and they established 3 colonies there. And in 1766, 10 years before the Declaration of Independence was signed, the Moravians established a town in North Carolina called Salem. 160 years ago, and 3 days. The former mayor of that town and 2 other gentlemen, former mayor, his name was John Vest. He had been away on business trips and found themselves 160 years ago in the midst of the Civil War. Now the Moravians, this Christian group that immigrated over from Europe, were both pacifists and in a lot of ways socialists. They came and they had settled this town. He was away on business 100 years later. He's coming back into town. He sees the Union troops camped outside of town. He knows about Richmond. He knows about Atlanta. He knows about Whitfield. They were all burned. He leaves his horses. He comes into town. He gets there. He goes to the current mayor and a couple other officials and say, the Union Army's here. We need to go surrender. They said, no, we're not surrendering. He said, well, let me tell you what will happen if you don't. And he tells them about these towns being burned and all the people being killed. So they finally agree and they ride out there and they surrender to General Palmer, who's the front line of General Stoneman's, is also often called Stoneman's raid, which pushed into Virginia eastern Tennessee and North Carolina. They go, they surrender the town. The town is now a historic landmark and one of the highest tourist areas in the city of Winston-Salem. That's the name of the city now. You might have heard of Winston cigarettes. No matter where I'm at, I'm always reminded where I'm from. and what we did. That former mayor, Mayor Vest, was my great-great-great-great-great-grandfather. And what he knew was that your victory was in your surrender. And whenever you find yourselves in this place of resistance to being in the womb or the cocoon, your resistance, your surrender is your strength. Your surrender is your victory. Now, I didn't learn this story about my family and the heritage of it until I was about 35 or 40 years old. And man, I was so glad to learn that because a lot of my family history isn't that great. Recent or ancient. He went on later to become one of the first commissioners of Winston-Salem and the region. And he was also one of the first who were sent out in North Carolina in the 1870s to round up KKK people. Our surrender is our strength. The womb is a place of growth. The cocoon is a place of change. The transition is letting go who you were and becoming who you are. And by not doing that, the only thing you're holding back is yourself. Like Grandfather Vest, you might be affecting those around you,